So we are here together with Devageet, Osho personal dentist, and we would like to ask you a very simple question. Tell us a little bit about how you end up being Osho personal dentist, and how later you end up writing a book about your story with him.
So when I came to meet Osho, I had no intention of being a dentist. I'd finished being a dentist. As far as I was concerned, dentistry was part of my past life, finished. So when I first came, I first saw him, I did groups, but then I went away, finished up my business in the West, and then I came to live at the end of 1978. And then when I asked Vidya, I'd like to come and work here. And so she said, you be our dentist. And I said, what dentist? You haven't got a dental room. She said, we have got a dental room. There's an American dentist, Nirvan, who's just built a dental room. You be our dentist. But I said, if Nirvan's here, how can I be your dentist? She said, just be a dentist. And I said, but I didn't come here to be a dentist. I came here to be a disciple, to chop wood and carry water, you know. And she said, Devageet, just be a dentist. And I said, well, have you asked Nirvan if he wants somebody to be a dentist with him? She said, just be a dentist. So I went round the corner. It was just round the corner. I met Nirvan, who was about 58 at the time. And the dental room was smaller than this room. It was tiny. And he had got all this beautiful cabinet, all these cabinets together and all the machinery. And he said, he was showing me all the stuff because nobody there really appreciated the dentistry and all the beautiful work that he had done. So he was showing me all that stuff, and I said, Vidya has said that I should come and be a dentist. And he said, okay, you can be a dentist here. And I said, but how? It's not big enough for two of us. He said, well, we'll find a way. So the next day, he told me he's been sick ever since he's been in Pune. He's had amoebas, he can't get an erection, and he wants to go back to the West, and he hates everybody in the front office. So the next day, he came, he said, I've got all these vitamin pills and a mattress that I had specially made. You can buy them. I'm leaving this afternoon. Within 24 hours, he'd gone, and I was the dentist.
So she was right.
She was right, and yes, she was right. But when I first came, on the very first day, when I met Lakshmi, there wasn't even a place to piss in. There wasn't even a place to have breakfast. And Lakshmi said, she asked me my name, and I told her, and she said, what do you do? And I said, I'm a dentist. And she said, will you be our dentist? I burst out laughing. There was nothing there. There was just a huge hole in the ground where Buddha Hall was going to be. There was no water laid on, there were no showers, I couldn't find a place to go to and have a pee after dynamic, and I thought she was mad. That's how it happened. 18 months later, I was a dentist there.
So now, many years later,
many years
you have a few books
yes.
ready to be
yes.
published. And
yes.
Tell us a story how this book came to life. And
well, as I'm remembering it now, there'd been a poetry evening in the, as it was in those days, the commune in Pune. And I had read some of my poetry, and Osho used to get feedback. I don't know how, but probably somebody was there, like Vivek may have been there. Anyway, he said, I would like you to write a book.
When was that?
This was 1988. And he said, I want you to write a book, and it's going to be called Bhagwan, the First Buddha in the Dentist Chair, Amusing Anecdotes by His Personal Dentist, Swami Devageet. He gave me the whole thing.
Full title.
The full title. And then he left it to me to write it. I'd already been writing for 3 years, the previous book. So at that point he knew that I could write. And then he just left it up to me. He never saw any of the book, of this book. In fact, he never saw any of the other books. But the first book, I'd like just to mention that now. The first book, he said, I want you to write a book which is a subjective account of your life with me.
Subjective account.
A subjective account of your life with me. Now that was very different from the other books. There had been, I think, 2 other books that he'd given to Amrito, one to Anando. And then he'd also given me specific instructions. He said, this book needs to be widely distributed. It needs to find an outside publisher. And so, 25 years later, it may find that publisher now. Who knows?
When you say Osho, they also told me to write this book,
yes.
Can you describe like the circumstances, like how
yes.
you were like one-on-one?
No, there was never ever, except on one occasion, a one-on-one, but the circumstances when I used to speak to Osho was always in the dental room. So the first book, when he asked me, was not in the dental room. I was in London. I had just done an interview with Hugh Milne on the radio, and his book was a piece of black propaganda, and I was there on this radio program providing a balance to the viewpoint that Hugh Milne was putting. He was making out Osho to be a very bad character, and I was there to provide some balance. I was there to represent the disgraced guru, Bhagwan Sri Rajneesh. And in that whole interview, there were so many lies, and I had been in all of those situations that Hugh Milne was talking about, and I could refute every one of those lies. They were pure lies. And then afterwards, when I came home, it was about 2 o'clock in the morning, and I remember as I came back into my house in Hampstead at that time, people were phoning me up, sannyasis were phoning me up and saying how wonderful it was that somebody was actually supporting Osho in this time when he was getting a very bad press. And then I got another phone call about 6 o'clock in the morning from Arup in Geneva saying, Osho has just sent a message that he wants me to write a book. So I was completely amazed because only 2 hours earlier than that, I had decided, why is it only the people who hate Osho that write the books? Yeah. I want to write a book which tells the details of how wonderful it is to be a disciple of Osho. I'm using the word Osho now because I've been using it for years. And that's how it started. So I started writing this book. I didn't know how or what. He gave me the title, which was Bhagwan, Messiah of Life, Love and Laughter, a subjective account of my life with Bhagwan Sri Rajneesh. But he gave me no indications of how to start, where to start, or what he wanted. So I began at the very beginning, where I gave a kind of small biography of myself, how a person born in the East End of London who became a dentist could be in India with an enlightened master. It was impossible. When I looked at my life, it was impossible for me to be there. And then, as I gave this like 3-chapter resume, and later, about 2 years later, Osho had asked me how the book was going, and I said, well, I'm on about page 1400 right now. And he said, why is it so big? And I said, well, I've written some chapters about myself before I met you. He said, well, nobody wants to read those. So he said, take those out. So I took those out. And then we made the book a much more manageable size. But for me, my life with Osho is the culmination of my life. And to make that contrast, I felt it was important just to say where I'd come from. Because otherwise, how does a person like me come to be at the feet of the Master? More, how does a person like me come to be at the teeth of the Master? It's an impossibility, but it happened.
Yeah, but at that time there were nearly everyone in a different way. There were impossibilities.
Well, I didn't know that. You see, I wasn't interested particularly in anybody else's stories. I was there just to be with Osho. And I didn't know.
How did it happen actually anyway?
How
Just
did
in
what?
short, yeah.
How did I actually get to Osho?
Yeah.
Well, my life, I was 33 years old. I'd been back from Australia a couple of years where I'd been as a dentist there. I was on a spiritual path. I was looking for some meaning in my life. I'd been meditating in all kinds of ways, in Buddhism, Zen, Hinduism, Sikhism. I was running, I was fasting. Anything you can think about, I tried it. And as far as I was concerned, nothing was changing me. I was involved at that time in a course on Oriental philosophy, a 7-year course with a brilliant teacher, Dr. Frank Turk. And he was teaching us about Taoism and about Zen and all these wonderful things. And then I suddenly realized at one point there that I'm in a graveyard looking for life. He was telling me everything from the past, which was beautiful. But I was looking for something that would bring meaning into my life now. I wasn't looking for information. I was looking for transformation. And at that point, I made a decision that I need to find a master. The next day, somebody walked into my dental surgery and said to me, "Are you a meditator?" This was a woman, a brand new patient. And I said, "Why do you ask?" She said, "Well, on the wall, there's this painting of a man meditating." I said, "Yeah, I painted that 7 years ago in Australia." It was a naked yogi with his back to me. He was half bald, sitting in the middle of an orange void. Exactly. I'd done many paintings. I used to be a painter before I came a sannyasin. And then I'd brought 3 paintings back from Australia. This was one of them. She looked at that painting and she said, "Well, you must be as mad as my husband. He's a meditator too." So he was the next patient. He came in and I said, "Your wife said, I'm as mad as you are. You are a meditator." He said, "Yeah, I belong to a sect called Radha Swami."
Radha Swami.
Radha Swami. It's a Sikhism sect. I knew nothing about it. And he lent me some books, and as I was in those days, everything I read, I thought, wow, this is fantastic, I'm off. And so I became, after a few months, initiated into this sect. It was horrible. I used to get up at 4 o'clock in the morning and meditate for 3 hours. That in itself was beautiful, but I didn't feel it was reaching into me. I felt I was making an enormous effort for something I didn't know anything about. It didn't make any sense to me. Then my marriage fell apart. That's another whole story. Then I met another group of people who were with another guru, and his name was Guru Maharaji, the Divine Light Mission. I went and I spent some time with those guys, and they were very beautiful. Later I discovered they'd all been heroin addicts and working with the Divine Light Mission and meditating in that way. They'd all completely broken their habit. They were amazing and wonderful people, and I was very happy to be with them. And then a friend of mine said, "There's another meditator in town." Now, I lived in a very small fishing town in Cornwall in England, and meditation was not something that people did. I was a freak. So they introduced me to this person, and he was dressed in red. He had a mala around his neck, which I didn't know what it was. It looked like a wooden necklace, and I had no idea what it was. And even his nose was red. He had a cold at the time. And he told me his name was Swami Devageet. And I said, "What kind of name is that?" And he said, "Well, when you come to Osho, he changes your name." And I said, "Why?" And he said, "As an indication that that old life is finished." It made complete sense to me. I looked at this picture of the mala, and it was a man. I'd never seen a man like this before. He looked very much like Tolstoy. You know, the original, as Tolstoy was. And that was the first, I had no contact except through books, because I was a reader in those days. And I asked him what kind of meditation he does, and he said he does this thing called dynamic meditation. And I said, dynamic meditation, what's that? And he described these 5 stages, you know, of breathing very fast and hard and chaotic, screaming and shouting, and then jumping, and then stopping. And I was completely amazed. I said, what kind of meditation is this? Where's the meditation? And he said, you need to clear something so that you can experience the meditation in the stop. I didn't know what he was talking about, but in those days I was a fanatic for exercise and swimming and tennis and running and all of those. So I thought, well, good, maybe I can meditate and stay fit at the same time. So I started doing dynamic meditation with Sangeet. We did it in an empty cinema. There were 2 of us in a cinema, empty, in the Falmouth Art School. The very first time I did dynamic meditation, first of all, it was in the dark, pitch black. Second, he asked me to wear a blindfold, even though it was pitch black. And then, as we got into this, I was completely, from that first moment, I knew something powerful and effective was happening to me. I could breathe, I was fit. I was a runner and swimmer and all those things, so I could breathe like crazy. When it came to the catharsis, I couldn't remember ever screaming and roaring. I was like a lion and I was jumping up and down, and I couldn't believe the freedom that I had in that still, dark place. Then came the Who, and in the Who, I had images of myself. They came out of nowhere. I saw myself as a woman dressed as a Balinese dancer with gongs on her fingers and her ankles. I knew it was me. How can I have a memory of me that I knew nothing about? This was my first dynamic meditation. And then after that, I did dynamic meditation for about every day for the next, couple of months. And then about 2 months later, my wife announced to me that she was going to leave. She was going to live with her lover, and she was going to leave me to look after the children. We had 4 children. She was going to take the youngest child, my daughter Josephine, and she wanted me to stay and take care of my 3 boys. And she gave me 6 weeks' notice. So at that point...
How many years have you been together?
15, 16 years, married, and 5 years before that. So at that point, the sannyasin that I'd first met, Sangeet, he had nowhere to live, so he had come to live with me. I had a small flat by the river, and he was living with me, and I told him that...
And the kids?
No, at that point, she was still there. She was looking after the kids, and she gave me 6 weeks' notice before she was moving out. And then I came back to my small apartment, and I said to Sangeet, I've got 6 weeks before I have to start taking care of all my kids. I need a holiday just before all of that starts. And then I explored all kinds of holidays, where to go. I didn't want to go on any holiday. Now, by that time, I'd already read 2 of Osho's books, and I'd already got a whole stack of tapes. When those books had come, like there was one book, as I was driving to work, it was just on the seat next to me, and as I looked at that book, tears were coming down my face.
Like a recognition kind of thing?
I hadn't seen the book. I had no idea what the book was about.
Like you saw
I
the
hadn't
photo,
cried for 20 years.
What was on the cover of the book?
It was wrapped in sacking. It was wrapped in those days when you got a book from India, it was wrapped in, looked like old potato bags. You had to rip it off, and then underneath that there was brown paper, then underneath that there was the book. There was nothing to see. All I knew was I looked at this book, and suddenly I was crying. I'm in the middle of a traffic jam driving my Volvo to work, and I'm crying. I had no idea then how a thing like that could happen. I just thought it has to be something with my marriage or something. Anyway, as I then told Sangeet that I've got 6 weeks before my wife leaves, he said, well, why don't you go to Pune? I said, Pune? Pune? It hadn't even crossed my mind. I thought, what a brilliant idea. How do I get to Pune? He knew a travel agent in London, a Mr. Ganguly. So I phoned Mr. Ganguly. I tell him I want to go and see Bhagwan in Pune. He said, I can have the ticket with you by this time tomorrow evening. I got the ticket within...
Visa?
Didn't need a visa in those days. English people didn't need a visa. Yeah. But you needed shots. You needed injections and this and that and the other. Now, I hated the idea of shots anyway. But I got some, whatever it was, anti-smallpox or something. But within less than 2 days, I was on my way to Pune. I had no idea how to find the ashram. I had a little piece of newspaper. They used to produce a newspaper in those days. I think it was called Sannyas News. And on the back of the last page, there was always a small indication of the address, how to get there, and stuff like that. And so that's all I had. And as I came from the airport in Pune, in those days, the Pune airport was like a cattle shed. It was just a small hut. The plane pilot drove the bus that took us from the airport. He stopped outside. I had no idea where to stay. He stopped outside a hotel, and I thought, well, you know, I don't know anywhere else to stay, so I stayed there. And so my first night in Pune, I stayed in the Blue Diamond. In those days, I was meditating at 4 o'clock in the morning. I was still doing my Radha Swami meditations, and I was a meditation fanatic. When I got up at 4 o'clock in the morning, I did my 2 hours of meditation, and then came out and saw people lying on the ground, like wrapped in shawls. I had no idea that this kind of thing happened anywhere. So this was a taste of India, you know, these people. And as I'm walking, stepping over these bodies in the Blue Diamond, as I got downstairs onto the place where the guy calls for the rickshaws, again, there were 3 people sleeping on the floor. One of them suddenly sat up and said, "You want rickshaw, Baba?" I didn't even know what a rickshaw was. And I said, no, I want to find Bhagwan Sri Rajneesh. He just nodded and went back to sleep. I had my piece of paper. I come down the steps, and a sick Indian dog comes out of the darkness, jumps on my leg, and starts fucking my leg. I'm completely freaked out. His eyes are running, the fur had fallen off. It was disgusting. I felt that I was going to get rabies. I didn't know what to do. I start running.